Awesome. Well, hello. Hi, Dr. Lambert.
Hi, Kristin. It's good to be with you.
It's good to be with you too. Thank you so much for spending this time with me today to kind of engage in dialogue about how, the current global pandemic is really its effects on leadership, and especially how do we as leaders lead virtually during a time of crisis? I know that's a question in so many of the minds of our Elon students right now, especially with those who engage in the Center for Leadership and with our Leadership Fellows program. So I'm excited to kind of take this opportunity to dive deep into that question. But we'll start off with a little bit of your story and the work that you're doing, and then we'll dive right into some questions.
All right, that sounds wonderful. For the past couple of years, my colleague at Elon, Peter Felton, who directs the Center for Engaged Learning and is our assistant provost, he and I have been doing research for a book that is coming out by Johns Hopkins University Press this fall called Relationship-Rich Education: How Human Connections Drive Success in College. And it's a story about how much relationships are central to education and learning. Just this morning, Peter and I had a conversation on the phone because we've gotten back to Johns Hopkins and said, the book's all written. We've just finished the copy editing for it and said, we want to write an epilogue for this book, a post or to acknowledge the COVID-19 moment that we're in right now, because you've experienced something extraordinary as an undergraduate, which is you've been in this relationship-rich university environment or context, and then all of a sudden life is upside down, right? Absolutely. And relationships feel very different in this kind of format on WebEx or Zoom, synchronously, asynchronously, however our education formats have changed. I checked in with my Elon 101 leadership fellows the other day, students I had in class, and their remark was, we will go back to Elon, but we will never take for granted what we have lost. The informal conversations on the sidewalk, hugging a friend, having long conversations over dinner, sitting in a faculty member's office. We miss these things. Students mourn the loss of these things. And so I was struck by your use of the word relationships right off the bat in your introductions, because I think that's what Elon is all about: relationships, mentoring. The teaching and learning business is very much a relationship-centered business, don't you think?
Absolutely, it is. Yeah, it absolutely is. And so a lot of your work around mentorship is a lot about just the importance of having multiple mentors throughout undergrad and even, graduate experience, and the value of those mentorships in assisting to help find a place, help find a home, but then also push for growth. But I think a lot of us, not only as mentors to others, but as mentees, often right now are struggling to find answers and ways to support the relationships that we are in. So what might be some of your advice for both mentors and mentees as we try to guide others during this time, or be guided when we still have a lot of uncertainty around this global pandemic?
Sure. It's a great question. First, I want to underscore your point about how important it is to develop a network of mentors or a constellation of mentors in college, as I think one of the most important outcomes of college. And these can be faculty members, they can be all manner of staff, they can be influential peers. I think if you leave college with that network of mentors, you've achieved something really important. And I know that's something the Leadership Fellows program really encourages. In this time, I think it's really important, as we are being mentored, as we are trying to mentor others, to be authentic. I mean, don't put on this fake brave face. It's all right to tell people what you're thinking, what you're fearing, what you're feeling. And so be your authentic self, lead with your authentic self, I think is one of the most important pieces of advice I can give. And then secondly, I'd say it's very much okay to say, I don't know what the future is going to be, that we're going to figure this out together. I think sometimes mistakenly leaders feel that it's not okay to say, I don't know what the answer is. But these are extraordinary times and none of us can know what the answers are. And we're going to have to plan for multiple scenarios going forward because we don't know how the chips are going to fall, right? And then thirdly, I'd say we all just have to be ready to pivot. We have to be ready to change our plans, change our way of thinking. One of the leaders I've had the extraordinary privilege to know in my lifetime and to go fly fishing with a couple of times in Montana is Justice Sandra Day O'Connor from the US Supreme Court, first woman elected to the Supreme Court. And when Justice O'Connor told me this story, it's not a pandemic story, but it's another story sort of born out of a different kind of adversity. She graduated second in her class from law school at Stanford. And when she was looking for jobs at the time, the only positions that were being offered to her were legal secretary jobs because women were not considered for partner or associate positions at major law firms. And so she pivoted. And what she did is she heard somewhere in Arizona there was a district attorney that had hired assistant DAs who were women in the past and went and spoke to him and said, would you hire me? And he said, well, I would, but I don't have any openings right now. And so what Justice O'Connor did was to think about it for a little bit and then to write him back and say, I noticed your secretary had sort of extra room in her office for another desk. And if you let me, I will come to work for you for free until a job opens up and then you can hire me. And he did. And so she goes from there to a career that ultimately places her in the highest court in the land. I've always admired that story about somebody looking at a situation and deciding, I'm not going to accept the status quo here. I'm not going to accept what's being offered to me, which is a legal secretary's position when I'm qualified to do so much more. I want to practice law. So she pivoted and ended up in a good spot. And it's a story about how I think we all need to be willing to shift our frameworks in order to get to where we want to go.
Absolutely. There's a lot of power in that. And especially having the mindset of being open to that. Sometimes it's hard, especially in the midst of all that is changing. One of the other struggles that I have personally been facing, so I think, as you touched on, I've realized just how much I'm grateful for, especially for my Elon education. Being a Phoenix means something very different now than it had before. But I think sometimes it feels a little bit paralyzing because while recognizing all of the wonderful things I have, I can't do that without recognizing the things that many other people don't have. And sometimes it is just, it's that paralyzing feeling of I want to do something, but I'm also stuck in my home. And I'm not sure what to do as a leader to help my community. So what might you suggest to kind of overcome those feelings of hopelessness or helplessness for our students as we're still restricted in the stay-at-home order?
Well, I think there's so much that we can all do and must do. I think this crisis has seriously highlighted some structural inequities in our country. And you and I are sitting here in nice houses with Wi-Fi and technology, and we're not hungry. I have a paycheck coming in. You probably have a supportive family behind you. You know, we're so fortunate we can't even begin to describe how lucky we are, right? Um, but we have to act. My older daughter is a physician, and she was telling me a story about, she runs a clinic for children who are oftentimes in poverty. The needs out there for diapers, for baby formulas, our food pantries are working overtime to try and support families who have lost their incomes. Think about how undocumented workers right now are feeling, especially on the margins of things. And there are community organizations that we can support to help them as well. United Way in Alamance County is doing a tremendous job right now, but they need extra money. So if you have $25, write a check to United Way, write a check to your food bank. Some of these places are looking for young volunteers they won't take people my age these days, but looking, if you're willing to brave it, to at some point along the lines to help deliver meals to people. So there's so much that can be done even without leaving our house. I think it's important to feel the gratitude and to realize how lucky we are, but we've also got to be taking tangible action to help those who have far, far less than we do.
Absolutely. And there's absolutely no denying that switching to a virtual format for Elon classes, but then also just the world switching to a virtual format opens up a large door of problems with equity and opportunity. So, how can we, as leaders in the spaces where we have elevated voices, work to make sure that we are working with equity during this time?
Well, that is a really, really great question. And there was Peter Felton texted me this link for a New York Times column this morning by a fellow by the name of Viet Thanh Nguyen. And he basically makes the same point in a very powerful way. And he said that, COVID-19 is really, as he describes it, kind of a movie villain. It's not, in this story, it's not the scary monster. The scary monster is all of these structural inequities that are highlighting who's getting hit by COVID-19 the hardest, which are people with pre-existing conditions. And I pretty much think that many of them don't have access to the best kind of health care. So I think what this crisis is doing is exposing all of these inequities in our country. And so I think what we need to do is think about, well, when the immediacy of this crisis has passed and we start going back to some semblance of normalcy, it will be different, certainly, at least for a time. How do we want to work to address these? Are we just going to paper them all over, or are we going to vote? Are we going to campaign? Are we going to get behind candidates that want to address these structural issues in our society? And that's the big point for me, is that these inequities are deep. They're oftentimes papered over, but this crisis has pulled back the curtain on them, and they're staring us right in the face. And we've got to do something about them.
Absolutely. What do you think might be, or how might Elon be affected afterwards? What are some maybe expected changes? Because as we're saying, things won't be just normal again, because even if, all of a sudden we do come back and we're back in the classroom, we're back to those special relationships, these systems have been torn open, and we've seen things in a very different light after kind of being forced out of the normal system that we've been using. So how might that affect different structures at Elon?
Well, I think it's going to affect higher education broadly in very different ways. I mean, there are some small, tiny colleges that were struggling prior to COVID-19, and I think you're going to see a significant number of colleges decide that they can no longer continue to operate. And that's going to be very sad. And it's going to affect a lot of communities across the United States where that college in a small town somewhere is the lifeblood of that community. And it's going to go away. And that's going to be very harmful. States are putting so many resources into fighting COVID-19. That will adversely affect resources to support public colleges and universities, I would strongly suspect.
Mhm.
For Elon, I know President Book and her leadership team are preparing for multiple scenarios going forward. I think it's our hope that we will regather in the fall
Mhm.
um, and reestablish this relationship rich basis for an Elon education, because as heroic as our faculty have been in responding to um, try to make online as good as possible, most students I have talked to have said it's not the same.
Mhm.
And they are really looking forward to getting back and being in human contact with their professors and mentors and staff on campus. But it will be different, I think, for a year probably, where um, we will think about maybe having a little more distance between desks in classes and how many people are in a dining hall at one time, and whether we do things like college coffee a little bit differently, and whether we do convocations differently, and do we have spectators at sporting events? When can we allow big gatherings to happen again as opposed to smaller gatherings? There's a million questions to be sorted through and addressed and planned for. And then there have to be multiple contingencies. So you not only need a plan B, I think plan A of just going back and doing what we did last fall is not going to be an option.
Mhm.
Um, but aside from plan B, there needs to be a plan C and a plan D. And I'm
Absolutely.
confident the leadership of Elon is gonna think that through
Mhm.
very carefully, putting the health and safety of our students and faculty and staff and the broader community first, and figure out how to make this work. And
Mhm.
I'm confident. I'm confident the best, some really good people are going to get their heads around those questions.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, to turn it back more towards relationships, um, because we're on this online virtual world, our way of connecting with others has really been adjusted, and in ways that I think that's not in the leadership handbook of things you normally learn of how to lead in a time of crisis. So how might we as leaders lead most effectively right now when we can't be with our team? How do we work to really motivate each other in the same way, especially when there's so much that's happening outside of our walls and windows?
Right? It's a great question, and it makes you think about all we're missing from the informal interactions that you would have in the Center for Leadership, or before or after class with your professors. Everything that we've taken for granted for so very long is all of a sudden gone. And um, so I think the key word for me in answering your question is intentionality. This just simply requires us to do this extra level of thinking and planning about, who do I need to make a connection with? I find that with my own students, I have 14 graduate students, and I'll say, "Hey, how's everybody doing?" And we'll be on WebEx, and everybody will go like this and give me a thumbs up. And I know that some of them are not like this. They're worried about, I've got to find a job come May, or this is really stressful to me. And so I think we've got to reach out to people individually or in smaller groups to check in and see how our friends and mentees and mentors are doing. Scott Morrison in the School of Education and I were on a WebEx call this morning, and it's his practice. He was saying to get online in his room 30 minutes before class begins. And he said about half the class checks in early, and that's really good time to just check in with people. It's a great example of a strategy that's intentional and thoughtful and informal. But I think we've just got to reach out and think to ourselves, who are the people that are most important to me, and am I staying in contact with them? My Elon 101 TA won a Lumen Prize yesterday. And so she got in touch with me, and we had a little celebration over the phone yesterday afternoon. And those are important moments, and leaders need to be intentional about keeping up these networks and these relationships. It's so very important.
Absolutely, it is. So what are some of the things that you've been doing for yourself to give yourself little moments of joy, to keep morale high during this time? And what might be some of your recommendations for your students to keep that same type of energy too?
Well, one thing that has not changed for me is exercise. I think that if you're in any kind of leadership position or high stress position, you've got to pay yourself first in terms of exercise. I oftentimes tell this story. When my first year as president of Elon, I gained 25 pounds, I think, because everybody, when you move to the South, tells you they love you by giving you a pound cake or a ham biscuit or and after a year, I thought, oh my goodness, I've got to get serious about changing my ways here. And so took all that off with some effort and just decided that if you're going to be in this for the long haul, you've got to have an exercise program for yourself. And I think that's even more important during stressful times like this. So our family has been doing a lot of walking, and we're intentionally trying to go different places. We walk the Elon campus a lot. We'll go to different parts of campus, and it's very sad, I'll have to tell you, and lonely. I walked through the Mosley Center the other day. I had to drop by the mailroom for a minute, and there was one student in the Mosley Center, if you could imagine. It was a surreal feeling. But anyway, I digress. Exercise is, I think, the first thing that you need to commit to, and taking a break, taking a breather. In North Carolina, April has been the most spectacularly beautiful month, and the dogwood are out and the azaleas out. And we've been working on a garden behind our house, and I've been enjoying that. I've been enjoying that too, and putting in some new plants and thinking about how we want to plan this garden going forward. So that's been great. I think we've also, I know this sounds hokey, but somebody around the dinner table, my wife Lori's 88-year-old mom has moved in with us during this crisis, because she was by herself in Florida, and Lori swooped down to go get her because we didn't want her down there by herself. Absolutely. And I think usually around the dinner table every night, somebody says something about how incredibly fortunate we are, that we have food on the table, and we have a roof over our heads, and we've had an interesting day, and doing different things. And I mean, just expressing that gratitude is so very important. I was talking with a friend on the phone yesterday, one of our university trustees, Bill Herbert, who's a physician in Charlottesville, Virginia, and he said, when I find myself complaining to myself, I think, you are like the luckiest person on earth. Be
Mhm.
quiet and, just remind yourself that how much we have, how much privilege we have,
Mhm.
and not to take that for granted. And we also pray. I mean, we also think that we need to check in spiritually,
Mhm.
and um, and that's important as well. Not everybody thinks about religion and spirituality. It's very personal, but these are times, I think, not to ignore that dimension of your life. So yes, you're busy. Yes, you're trying to keep up academically, but it's very important, I think, to keep up spiritually and emotionally and physically, um, to keep getting that exercise and stay active and get out in the sunshine.
Mhm.
That's Your mother's always told you that's important. Go outside and play.
Yeah,
Go through.
it's fun. I'm from a small town in Ohio, and it's always special to come back to my roots. And I'm in my house that I've been in since I was one. So it's definitely like this is home, very much a home for me. But I love it because I'm in the desk that I studied in all throughout high school, and I have a window right across from me, and I love watching the street, which is usually very quiet, but with all that's been happening, I see kids riding scooters down the road, and parents going for walks, and lots of cute dogs that pass by, and it definitely fills my heart because it's a time where I think so many communities are coming together, even in a time where we're separated, in a very real way, to kind of reconnect with ourselves, like you were saying, spiritually and physically and emotionally, and sometimes as a community too. And there's great power in that, and I love I feel like I get a little um, like front row seat to watch it happen for my community and my neighborhood, which is special.
And those are the kinds of questions I think we need to ask ourselves as we emerge from this crisis over a period of a year or so.
Mhm.
Do we want to go back to what we had before? Exactly. Or can it be better? I think it can be a lot better.
Yeah.
I think life can be greener. I mean,
Mhm.
this is um, we're using a lot less energy, and there's a lot less carbon emission out there these days. And I think one of the things we'll think about is, do I really need to hop on a plane to go to a 2-hour meeting,
Mm.
or is there a more efficient way to conduct this business that's also effective? And it's just one tiny example of, I think, the questions we have to ask ourselves about, um, can we move forward in a better way than simply repeating what we had before?
Mhm.
But
Absolutely.
wanting the best of that, wanting the relationships piece back, right?
Yeah.
That's the most important thing.
Yeah, I am excited. I was saying in another interview just like this, one of the things that I love the most about Elon is not only the wonderful, rich education I get in the classroom, but the wonderful, rich education I get outside of the classroom, whether that be through jobs, but also just like moments of sitting in, dorm room hallways and talking about experience and what happened today. And you won't believe what I learned in this one class. And I'm excited to get that back and really kind of reconnect with those moments, like we were saying, that you miss and you don't realize how much you miss them until they're gone.
There's a sacredness to them,
Mhm.
and we long to get that back. We will get that back.
We
I
will.
promise. We
Yeah.
will.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much. This was
Kristen,
absolutely wonderful.
it's the
Um,
highlight of my day to talk to you.
it has been really, really special. Like I said, I think it's important to kind of recognize the difficulty in all of this, but then also to engage in dialogues and learn from each other, and to be able to have this opportunity to learn from someone who's been such a leader in our community for so long is something that is really, truly special.
But my privilege to talk to you. All right. Be safe out there.
All right, you too.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye bye.